Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. How have you been? Just living it up out there in Turkey.
Yeah, man, just living in Turkey. Moving to Budapest soon. I can't wait. Can't wait.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
But right now, nobody's in the live right now. But thank you for clicking this video. Today, we're going to be having a debate. I've never had a debate on my channel before. I don't like to go back and forth with people. But when you meet somebody who's intelligent and has great and awesome ideas, I think it's good to sharpen the
Uh,
sword. You know, it's good to,
sharpen the sword. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I like that saying. Yeah,
yeah.
sharpen it.
Yeah, so steel sharpens steel. And I want everybody to go to Sleeping Giant Africa, the YouTube channel, and check out the new video that Tim dropped talking about the United States of Africa, like the possibility that we could have one big African country, right? So everybody pile in here in the chat because what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be challenging this smart man about his ideas about a united Africa. Now, now, Tim, just tell us about the
Yep.
video, man. Tell us about what's in that video, why Africa should be one country. Come on, man. Let's go.
Okay, so I guess here's me bringing out the manifesto. I'm making my pledge. So essentially, yeah, I guess it goes back to that kind of old saying of we're stronger together than apart. But there are just a number of different practical ways that you would have that with the United States of Africa. Just by the fact of it being one country, you're going to get the freedom of movement, the freedom to do business wherever you like, invest your money where you like. Um, it's going to be built around a certain number of languages, and that in turn will like have a big impact on like education, literature, and all of those areas, and help, in my eyes, act as a way of bringing Africans, together and having them more united. So yeah, I just see it as as that group, as a unit, the benefits that come with being a country versus a collection of many different countries.
Hmm.
Yeah, it would just help put the continent in just a much stronger position.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. I think you and I can both agree. We want Africa to be stronger. We want Africans to have a higher standing in the world. But my main problem, and I'm, by the way, everybody coming into the chat, coming into this live, watching it later, I'm playing devil's advocate here. You guys know me. You guys know I want the best for African people and black people, but I'm playing devil's advocate. The biggest problem with the idea of a United States of Africa is that right now we have 54 United States of Africa. When the colonialists came and told the Hausa, the Yoruba, and the Igbo, hey, all you guys are Nigerian, that was the beginning of a United States of Africa. Every individual country is a collection of different ethnic groups, tribes, religions, in a small country like Rwanda, there are more ethnic groups in that than any European nation. And so far, these countries have barely been able to keep it together. The, Now, we can point to many different factors why these countries are barely being able to keep it together. Colonialism being one, neo-colonialism being one. But how can we say we want a united Africa when we already have many united Africas in Nigeria, in Gabon, in Cameroon, and these things aren't keeping together? What do you have to say about that? Like, come on now, like,
Yes. So I guess just building on the point you made, you said it in terms of yes, different colonial powers created these artificial nations that were based on their personal kind of needs and wants when it comes to their boundaries with other colonial powers. Okay, so yes, a lot of the countries that we see today are still remnants of that in terms of, as we know, yeah, the colony of Kenya, Uganda was part of the East Africa colony, um, Nigeria, Ghana, the Gold Coast. Like the names have changed, but in many ways, when you look at the territorial boundaries, um, the demographics, the systems in place, they are still a hangover. They still have that colonial legacy. So I guess that was like the first point I made within the video in terms of the United States of Africa gives Africa a chance to establish um, a new nation on African terms.
right, but
Whereas what we have now that was, yeah, they are working with the boundaries, the national boundaries, and that were handed to them.
Right,
And
but before the
this would be establishing it on more, at least more organic grounds.
I mean, but is it really organic to tell the Hausa that you are now with the Igbo, and the Igbo that they are now with the Tutsis, and the Hutus that they are now with the Swahilis? I mean, there are so many different ethnic groups within Africa. They never had the chance to form nation states around individual identities. I mean, all the other groups of people, the Romanians, the Jews, even the Chinese, all different large ethnic groups had the ability once to have a nation state, but we're saying, we're going to skip past the part where the houses have their own nation, or the any ethnic group has their own nation. We're just going to skip past all that and move forward to the 1,000-year future that awaits humanity, where all of us are living under one nation. I mean, it doesn't seem fair for the Africans, right? Like, we would never tell the French, to do this, or the Italians to do this. Why do these different ethnic groups in Africa, you know, have to be all lumped in together? Do you get what I'm saying?
Well, I guess again going back to my vision and my idea for United States of Africa, I do believe it would put Africa in a stronger and better position when it comes to working and interacting with the outside world and working within. So I do, yeah, think it will make people better off. And like building on that point, again, I when I use the term United States of Africa, yeah, it's not necessarily it shouldn't be taken literally in terms of me saying, oh, okay, we need to make Africa a country and we're gonna 55 countries, 54 countries, 54 states. And it's gonna be based on this federalist US inspired system. I just kind of use that term more so because that's kind of the one that a lot of people refer and think of when they think of Africa as one country. But in terms of the um, national system and the model that's used to govern this nation, again, that's where different African countries, along with different ethnic groups and so many other social groups and demographics within the continent, this gives them an opportunity to, you know, of course, how it's done practically, that's another matter. But at least it starts the conversation of, okay, we're going to start this African nation. Um, when it comes to all the different ethnicities and religious groups that we have, yeah, how can we like what will that nation look like?
What
Will that nation have states, or will it be more of a matter of like a perhaps
Are we
yeah, like
talking
you have
about a federation or
federalist
a
states?
confederation? Are we talking about a federation, which is like the United States, where these individual regions have some autonomy over what happens there, but a large part they're dominated by a federal government? Or do we have some sort of confederation like Switzerland or the EU, where the federal power that be has literally no teeth, and states can sort of do as they please and opt in and out, and negate the rules of the super body? Does that, I mean, what are we talking about?
Yes, so this would be a nation. Yeah, so a nation state, and yeah, a country can come in different forms. You can have federal states, like what we see with the USA or Germany or India, for example. Then you have like kind of less federalist systems in countries such as China, where you have different provinces. There are a few of them that operate with more autonomy and power, but many of the other provinces, yeah,
Right.
don't have the same kind of powers and influence that like the states do in the US. Or,
Hmm.
it could be, you have the United Kingdom and other countries where it's not federal states. It's
Hmm.
more
It's a
so,
kingdom.
yeah, smaller counties within a larger central system. So,
Right.
and again, this is something when it comes to, yeah, having the conversation about a United States of Africa, and then yeah, working together to figure out what those political systems and those boundaries and just how this country is going to look like.
Right. If we're
At least we
go
can,
ahead.
yeah, have that conversation. Like a nation doesn't have to be restricted to oh, these federal states or the way that it's done in these particular European countries. Yeah, there can be a way where it can be a nation, yeah, a national model can be adjusted and built for this United States of Africa, as was once the case with the United States of America. It wasn't always plain sailing or a guarantee in terms of whether this nation will succeed or even form in the first place, but everybody started from somewhere and people find ways.
Right. I get what you're saying, man, but I find it hard. You know, what this reminds me of is this South Park skit. There was this a skit or a joke in South Park where these little elves said, "We're gonna take some socks and then profit." Right? That we make socks, something, and then profit. Right? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like we're missing that core of what's going to bring this nation together. And let's do a little bit of fan service because I saw somebody in the chat. Ozzy came in here earlier, and Ozzy jumped to one of my comments that I've said
Yes.
before we even started this. The hypothetical country, including including North Africa, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, Mauritania to some extent. We have to talk about the question of North African identity and inclusion in the African context. And something I have to bring up with you, Tim, and I've had this bone to pick with you for a while. I think you ignore the major elephant in the room, which is white supremacy and anti-black racism. And when we think about the African identity right now, we often think about it in terms of blackness. When we have Pan-African ideas, we're thinking about a united country or a place for black people. But a large portion of the continent is non-black, what we would consider that. And if you've been to North Africa, or unfortunately had the bad bad situations with North Africans, you'll know that anti-black racism is a big part of their societies. In their media, they show black women as prostitutes on TV. They are dumping black men in the middle of the Sahara right now. They sold us as slaves in Libya. There is extreme anti-black racism in North Africa. So how are we going to overcome that large hurdle of the white supremacist thinking in the minds of the North Africans who would almost under no circumstances uh, give up state power to black masters, to make themselves a minority to black men and black women. I mean, we have to think about that. I mean, come on now.
Give their power to the United States of Africa.
If there was a United States of Africa, and let's say it was a simple majority democracy, they would always be outvoted, even if all of them voted in the same block. They would always be outvoted. I find it very hard to say that these Arabs, or self-identified Arabs or Berbers or Amazigh, however they identify, would want to be a part of this super block, this super nation. So is the United States of Africa even feasible? Or should we focus on sub-Saharan Africa, Black Africa, and that sort of thing?
Okay, well, yeah, there's more than one way to skin a cat. It could be a situation where perhaps the focus is first with sub-Saharan Africa and then North Africa is approached later on, or it can be done in a way which is something that you are beginning to see happen across Africa in a way, in terms of you begin with regional zones like um, the East Africa
African, East African community.
community. Yeah,
Yeah.
the East African community, ECOWAS. We've been hearing a lot about them lately, but yep,
Isn't there
there's
one in
also
South Africa too? Like, aren't
that
Botswana,
regional bloc.
Namibia, South Africa, aren't they in some sort of block too? Or no? Am I wrong?
Yes, yes, and that's SADC. So
Oh,
yeah,
SADC.
SADC includes the whole
Yeah.
Southern African region. So like Namibia, Zambia,
Right.
Botswana, South Africa, Mozambique, Mauritius. Like I think it's like over Angola,
Hmm.
over 20 different countries. But yep, I think right now a lot of those zones are kind of more maybe like customs. Like, yeah, like when they trade with each other, they will
Hmm.
kind of have some sort of concessions in terms of, oh, we won't charge you guys the same taxes as we do to everybody else outside of that block. And I
Hmm.
think they may have some small concessions on like immigration and tourism. But yeah, you are beginning to see those building blocks where you could start with the regional zones and then, yeah, form into a larger one. But I'd say going back to the question of North Africa.
Don't dodge it.
Yeah, I
Don't
guess
dodge
I
it,
look
man.
at
Come
it.
on, come on. We have
Yeah,
to get
yeah.
Tim talking about anti-black racism once, man. Come on, come on.
No, I guess yeah. Maybe call me naive. Maybe I'm being a bit too optimistic about it. But yes, there is anti-black racism in across North Africa, and yeah, it's kind of like a big sort of unspoken part of Arab society, across the Middle East. When you look at all the things that are happening there now and in the past, whether it was the Arab slave trade or what we see now in terms of you have lots of Africans, especially African women, who go to countries like Saudi Arabia, uh, Dubai, the United Arab Emirates and other places to work, and then they find themselves, at the hands of abuse. So there is a lot of tension and a lot of friction there. I don't doubt that.
Hmm.
On the other hand, I do kind of wonder, and yeah, I guess, you know, I guess I can take from your word as well, because you visited North Africa. But it's like, yes, there is the negative side in terms of the things you mentioned before, like the slave trading markets in Libya and what have you. But on the other hand, I think like a week or two ago, I saw a short video. I think it was on DW News, which is like a German news organization, and it showed. I think he was a Ghanaian who I think his big plans, his initial plans was to go and go across the sea and try to make it into Europe. And then he
Hmm.
decided to like settle in Libya. And it showed him with a job working there, doing his thing. He'd been there for a couple years. He'd kind of set up his life. Like there are also, you know, like yeah, even within North Africa, there are
No,
black people,
no, no, no. The,
and
the
they
the
are
beauty of our people is that
doing
we'll all.
okay for themselves. And
I think.
I'd say another thing as well is when it comes to North Africa, North like I think many, or if all of them, are part of the African Union. I need to double check that,
Morocco
but I
jumps
think
in and out because of Western Sahara. They jump in and out. Then
okay
whenever
that
there's
the
Western Sahara on
politics.
the table, they exit.
Yes, yes. So, they are part of the African Union. Even the other day, when different African leaders went to Russia to speak with Putin and others and present their peace deal for Ukraine, one of the main, not many leaders actually attended. A lot of foreign ministers and government officials did. When you looked at the leaders who attended, I know it was, yeah, like Ramaphosa, I think the prime minister of like maybe Egypt, or it was either Egypt or Algeria. Like one of them was also there. So you do, yeah. On the one hand, there is still that separation and that tension, but on the other hand, you also see scenarios and everyday situations where North Africa is working with the rest of Africa to just get along, and there are also, yeah, I guess this is the main, I guess, thing that's pushing my optimism about it, is that, yeah, I think as time goes on and Africa and Africans become more prominent in media, politics, business, and society in general across the world, I feel like that's going to contribute to reducing that gap or that rift between the North Africans and the rest of Africa. Because yes, you know, when I think of the Africa today and Africans are, compared to where the continent was 20 years ago or 30 years ago, are a lot more prominent, important, and visible than they've ever been. And just everyday observations, like the fact that you think of Afrobeat and and how that's like taken over the charts, and it's not only doing that. You're seeing these artists like Burna Boy, Ira Star, Wizkid. They're going there and they're performing at Madison Square Garden. They're performing at, the Brooklyn Arena. They're going to London and performing at the Royal Albert Hall. So there is like, yeah, the kind of growing prominence and influence of Africa around the world. And on the other hand, there's also the reality of the demographics in terms of, yeah, most of Africa's population growth is within sub-Saharan Africa. Um, North Africa, the population is still growing slightly, but
Mhm.
yeah, the fertility rates, the birth rates, I guess it's getting to the economics a bit, but the birth rates are beginning to, they're not the highest, they're not as high as the rest of Africa. So yes, as sub-Saharan Africa's population continues to grow, I see that will naturally, almost naturally, increase their sway and influence not only
I mean,
around the world but
it
within the
depends on
continent.
it depends on
Within the
how that
continent.
it depends on what happens with that population. If you're in a situation like Turkey, where their population continues to grow, they are not probably going to be admitted to the EU because their population is not up to a certain living standard, or they're seen as an other, or they're not allowed to be a part of this group because of some othering that the main group is doing. So it depends. I mean, there are black people who are doing well in North Africa. There are indigenous black people to all of the North African countries. But I think what we are still struggling with is the idea of Africa as an identity. For the North African, Africa is not their main identity. They identify as Muslim first, Arab first, Tunisian first, Egyptian first, before identifying with an African identity. But I
Well,
do think
yeah,
we have something here with the blocks. And I want everybody to know, if you're watching this, I am not anti Pan Africanist at all, not at all. But I think there is more possibility for this idea of a Pan African state in either an individual country or the blocks. This is why I think ECOWAS is important, or this is why I think the individual African nations are important. And I think if we can demonstrate a Pan African idea within one African nation, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, or like in, I don't know, even the Central African Republic, anywhere, if we can show and prove the proof of a Pan African system in play, I think that is more uh, uh, possible for us rather than, you know, the aim could be for one nation as Africa, but the idea right now should be, let's make Ghana work at least. Let's make it so that the Senegalese aren't dying in the Mediterranean. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
okay, just okay. So just before we like delve into that, I just want just one last point on North Africa. I
Right.
say, yeah, this more so than anything, and it ties into the previous points about the growing influence and visibility of Black Africans, along with the growing population, the change in demographics, those trends. I would also argue that when it comes to this concept of a United States of Africa, I think this would present, yeah, I think what would make North Africa eventually want to join is the opportunity that lies there for them in terms of, yeah, what this means, what this represents, and how they can also use they yeah, I would argue that North Africa, as part of the United States of Africa, would be in a better and stronger position to
But
perform better
I,
economically
I,
and also flex their muscles and influence
I
other countries on the world stage.
but I think you're forgetting the ability of hatred and stupidity and ignorance in people to make them go against their own self-interest. I lived in Serbia for 2 years. Serbia
Mm.
has everything to gain by joining the EU. Every year they do a poll asking the Serbs, hey, you want to join the EU? What do you think the poll says? Do you think the poll is giving, hey, let's join the EU? What is the poll saying in Serbia? What do you think?
I don't know. I guess they say no because they're more aligned with Russia. Yeah.
They're more aligned with Russia, but also they don't want to be in a block with the Croatians. They don't want to be with the people like the Bosnians. They don't want to be with the Albanians or the Macedonians. They people, when there is an ethnic hatred or racial hatred or just plain stupidity or ignorance, I don't think there's a certain dollar amount that you can dangle in front of people's faces. like what happened in Brexit. But everybody
Okay,
knew that Brexit was going to hurt the UK, and they still did it anyway because of the invasion of the wrong melanin people, right?
okay, so I would say this to that. Like, yeah, and you do pose a good point there when it comes to, yeah, there's the what I would deem the rational economic and political arguments that make sense, and then you have people's emotions, their kind of like cultural norms and what they long for and what they identify with. There is that, and I guess to that I would just say, um, if I had to leave a message for North Africans pertaining to that, it would be that when it comes to a United States of Africa, yeah, I think, yeah, it would be a present. It would do so much to help, yeah, strengthen and make the North African region stronger and more prominent compared to them trying to do it on their own. Because again, the future, when we look at the future and we're moving away from fossil fuels, and even when you look at Africa in the future, the demographics and a lot more of the economic growth and increasingly the economy in general, the money is going into sub-Saharan Africa. So it's that situation where it's like, okay, when it comes to those game-breaking decisions and opportunities that can really change the fate of a country or a region, what
Hmm.
else do they have?
Hmm.
What
Right.
else? They can't join the EU.
No, they
Um,
can't join the
but
EU, but they could
they
definitely
can't.
not get. They can't join the EU, but I find it. It would make sense for the merchant class, for the people who own capital, the capitalist class, to want to have a united Africa. I'm sure the rich Moroccans who own trading firms and they want to sell rugs to the Cote d'Ivoirians. They'll be happy to have a United States of Africa. But the average Moroccan man would not want hordes of black Africans being able to just move freely through his country because as it's been happening, they really don't like it. They really don't like it. It's the same thing as we see in the EU and what we see in the United States when there's hordes of people coming with and they have been racialized and othered. People go against their own self-interest. We know in the United States that immigrants help our economy grow, but people still voted for Trump and said build the wall to hurt our own selves, right? And I think there's a lot that needs to be overcome when it comes to integrating North Africa. And I think we can both agree there is economic and there are so many benefits for North African integration with Africa. But the way it's been going right now, I don't see it happening. If that makes sense, I think we
No,
got to.
yeah, no,
I think we got to. I think we have to focus on
no,
ECOWAS, focus on the individual countries. Go ahead.
yeah. Again, when I made that video, it was just more, um, just talking about if tomorrow Africa became a country, this is what the different benefits and gains would be from it. It was
Right.
just more of a theoretical exercise.
Right.
In terms of the kind of practicalities building up to it, I'll leave that to the the officials and different African activists and there's a lot of this to go around. But
Right.
again, just speaking to North Africa, I see it as, yeah, move with the tides. What
Mhm.
else does the region have when it comes to those make or break opportunities to really change things? And also, and I guess, yeah, and I guess that, yeah, it goes back to the first point we made where we spoke about a new Africa and African terms and what the idea, what the message behind that nation would be. What is the character of this country, and
Mhm.
maybe, and that's what, yeah, I guess that was one of the points I made on the slide in terms
Mhm.
of maybe it takes something as crazy and as big as the United States of Africa to finally, yeah, gather that political will and that vision and that support from
Mhm.
all parts of Africa to come together and work on something big, because uh, it is a, yeah, it is a big, massive concept. Again,
Mhm.
like I said on the slide, if Africa was one country, it would be the largest country by land and the
Mhm.
largest country by population size and the
Mhm.
youngest, oh
Mhm.
yeah, one of the youngest countries in the world.
Mhm.
It would really like okay, maybe I'm, drinking a bit too much of the Kool-Aid, and yeah, to some extent I am. But I
Yeah.
think, yeah, with the United States of Africa, yeah, that would position the continent to really take it to the next level and
Right.
really fly and thrive.
Right. I'm with you, and I think everybody in the chat would agree with you, no matter what their persuasion is. And but I think what we're looking at here is just about feasibility and challenges that need to be overcome. And we can get off North Africa because let's talk about something else. Um, if there was a United States of Africa, or if we are moving towards further African state integration, what about working with some of these illegitimate governments? What are we just supposed to go on and keep on trading with Niger and Mali and Guinea and Sudan and all the countries that have, toppled their leaders undemocratically? Are we eschewing democratic values and the idea that one man, one vote for the African is important for just more closer economic ties? Because I think right now there's a big problem in terms of the future of African governance and what freedom looks like for Africans. Um, the money will continue to grow because Africa is the richest place on planet Earth when it comes to material wealth, just pure things that people want and desire and need. Africa has it all. But when it comes to what we will do with that material wealth and how people will live under those systems, that's a big problem that's happening right now. And what about that?
Well, okay, so yeah, that's good. Okay, let me break it down. So yeah, thinking about Africa, yeah, um, how these different kind of more more authoritarian
Yeah.
and perhaps illegitimate governments or factions would work within that national system. Yeah, that's something I'm not too sure about. I would say that again, under a United States of Africa would be one country, so there would only be one government or one central national government,
Mm-hmm.
and then within that, I don't know what that would look like in terms of whether you have again uh, different states, and then within those states you've got mayors, or in an African context, maybe it'll be based around I don't know, different like chiefdoms or you know uh, yeah, I guess that goes back down to like the formation of that nation,
Mm-hmm. So
and
are we talking
that
about
would
like
yeah.
strong executive? Are we talking about prime minister? Are we talking about rotating presidents representing 1 billion people? I mean, what are we talking about? What system of government? Are we going to have a House of Lords, a House of African Kings? What are we doing?
I don't know. I guess that's down to Africans to decide, on
Mhm.
the type of government they would want to embody the United States of Africa and represent them. I would say though that yes, as a nation, you will have a central government. Um, yes, there would be a higher, an all-powerful central government that
Mhm.
and then these the illegitimate governments or perhaps different warring groups
Mhm.
or extreme groups.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I guess they will be dealt with accordingly according to like the national system.
So, like
So I don't really have an
hypothetically, in the
answer on that.
United States of Africa, what happened in Niger a month ago? What should have happened? What would the United
But I
States of
guess
Africa do about Niger?
in that scenario there wouldn't. So yeah, if so under United States of Africa, it would be people from different parts of Niger trying to topple the central government. Maybe. And in that situation, yes, they have to be, you know, slapped down and, put back in their place naturally. Um, when it comes to, yes, dealing with more local, yeah, issues at the local level, because yeah, this is something I touched on in the video in terms of, yeah, invariably when you get this nation, you're going to have different separatist movements.
Hmm.
Okay, and
Hmm.
yeah, that is a good question. I'm not too sure how that would be dealt with. I can
Right.
guess, knowing Africa, different African countries, and the way that things can be here, I could see, and I did mention that in my video, in terms of you would get like a much larger military presence, more of
Hmm.
a police state, more
Hmm.
government surveillance. You would have those things, unfortunately, yeah, rise to help contain those that friction, that tension.
Right. I mean, obviously, I mean, every state has to enforce power. The state is the enforcement
Yeah.
of power by a certain class, by a certain group, and that would be necessary to make that happen, right? Um, hypothetically, the United States of Africa exists. Let's say we get everybody on board, right? How are we going to deal with, the influence of religion in this case? I think, the continent, as we know, is split 50-50 Muslim Christian. And within Islam, there is a strong tendency for theocracy to be the advocated form of government. I mean, how are we going to temper those flames? Because that's something that the continent is dealing with right now. We have jihadists in the Sahel going crazy. And that will always, always be a part of any society that has a sizable number of Muslims within their, voting bloc, within their demographics, whatever. There will be calls for the Sharia. I mean, I don't know how we're going to temper that.
Okay, so I guess I don't know all of the details surrounding it, and I'm not the most educated on North Africa, but from what I know,
Not even North Africa. There's a lot of. You were in Kenya. You saw how Muslim it was in Mombasa. Mombasa is like, you know, any city in Somalia or, Sudan.
yes. So, but yeah, when I think of North Africa, for example,
Mm.
I don't know. From what I don't know. Would you say there are any theocracies? I don't in North Africa.
Well,
I
Algeria
don't.
did fight a very long civil war against, people who wanted to establish a, Islamic Republic of Algeria after their independence. That's been a major part. I mean, before Sisi came in power, the Muslim Brotherhood, uh, Morsi, what was his name? Was it
Yeah, they had
Morsi?
their moment. Yeah.
Yeah, like they had a president who was a Islamist light, and that will always be a part. I mean, Somalia is still fighting against Al Shabaab, who want to establish what they want to establish. This will always be a part of uh, Africa, and this will always be a part of human society, religion, specifically Islam. It's just how are we going to deal with that, you know? And this is why I once again have to say that if we want a United States of Africa, you and I want it too. But I think the once again the best thing for us to do is to try this already. We have countries with a lot of Muslims, a lot of Christians, and let's try to make that country a place that is doing well economically, has good trade relations, has a stable democracy, is guaranteeing individual rights for everybody, not saying that gays get life in jail and we're gonna you know tell women that they can't work certain jobs. Some of the
Would you
things
say
that.
that
Mhm.
maybe that's Kenya? I mean, to a large degree, like it.
I'm, I mean,
Kenya,
Kenya is passing
Senegal, Ethiopia, Nigeria to some extent. Like it's there. There are possibilities.
right. I was only in Kenya for 2.5 months. I didn't get into the politics. I was just swimming in Diani, enjoying the nice waves at Diani Beach.
Yes.
But I do know that Kenya, along with many other East African countries, are threatening Black lives, Black gay lives, Black LGBTQ lives, and that's not good. But they do have
That's true.
civil. They
And
do
that's
have
something that I've seen. That yeah, that's been more of a recent shift.
right.
Even when I first saw the kind of political rhetoric surrounding it, and there was that. I think there was a trans reporter, a Kenyan trans
Hmm.
reporter who was
Right,
killed in a homophobic attack recently.
right,
And yeah, those did kind of come as like shocks to a lot of people
right,
because I would say, the things you mentioned before in terms of a country with, you know, sizable numbers of Muslims and Christians, where yes, they live side by side for the most
right.
part. Their rights are guaranteed. There's freedom of religion.
Hmm.
Um,
Stable
there's,
democracy,
there's
transition to power, representative government, as minimal corruption as possible. You know.
I mean, that the corruption. That's just that's like a separate issue. That's not really tied to religion or anything. That's
Well,
just
I'm
how
talking
it
about
is.
all things. I'm talking about encompassing all things that we want to see in the USA of Africa, right? So we want to.
Well, Kenya has its issues, but yeah, Kenya it ticks a lot of those
You,
boxes.
you know what Africa is like? Africa is like that friend group you have where each individual friend is doing something right and something fucked up at the same time. So like East Africa has like government going well, but then at the same time it's like, they're doing a lot of business with China and they want to become authoritarian, right? Then
But
you have like
would you? What's messed up about doing business with China?
in my opinion, China, and I, by the way, anybody who's watching, we have like a private chat and we send links back and forth. We want to do a podcast and we want to do more conversations like this. But China, come on, man, come on. China is setting up schools to teach Tanzanians how to be authoritarian leaders. Like China is trying to export their form of government. Like, listen, I have no beef with China, but I'm
Mm.
definitely against the idea of, you know, uh, a dictatorship from the top, from you know bureaucrats who basically just want to maintain the status quo and order at any cost. And
So
I think, go ahead.
so yeah, what I'd say to that is when it comes to China's influence on Africa, you know, yeah, don't just take my word on it. Everybody can, do their own research and, look up other people that they can get more information from on this. But at least from what I can gather and from what I know in terms of my experiences, having spent however much time in China, having spent time in Africa, and also kind of I've written on Africa China relations and the economy. So when it comes to that matter, I'd say regarding China's influence on the continent, I'd say more than anything, their influence is mainly economic in terms of yes, the construction industry, um, mining to a lesser extent, farming, agriculture, and then of course the made in China industry. Like when it comes to exporting all of these Lenovo computers and high RTBs to Africa, which they're making a lot of money from. I think that's
But I,
where
but I think
a lot of China's influence is when it comes to like influence culturally and on the politics. When we talk more about the soft power, I
right,
they are making attempts. They are trying, as you noted with that article you sent me about
right.
that leadership academy in Tanzania.
Hmm.
They are
Hmm.
trying, but when you really look at like the results
Oh,
and you
well, we won't know the
look at
results. We won't know the
their
results
influence,
until the next
but
10,
I'm
15
saying
years.
China's presence right now across the continent, it's not felt politically, or at least
Well,
not when it comes to political ideology or systems. It might be
at least,
felt politically in the sense of, oh, this country needs to pay China back this money that they got loaned, and they've got to find a way to pay the interest and pay the debt, and that's going to affect how much money is available for schools. It affects Africa politically in that way, but when it comes to these different African countries, thinking about political systems and culture and society, I think more than anything, that's where you still see, um, I think a lot of it is organic and African. And if there is outside influence, it's more so from the West and the Middle East in terms of, Islam and its influence. I'd say China, when it
we
comes to
won't
soft power,
we
they're not
won't know yet.
necessarily as big as we give them credit for
No, no,
right
no.
now.
China sucks. China sucks at soft power, and they really suck at spreading their political influence. Because if they really, really wanted to, there would be communist parties all over Africa, and there's none. There's none that are actually active. But I do think that we will see the results of China's investments in Africa, like that leadership academy and like other things they're doing, like helping certain governments set up like cameras all over the cities and that sort of thing. That sort of police state authoritarianism. We won't know the results of this until 10, 15, 20 years, of China's influence. And we can't just say, oh, China's influence is only economic, because the colonialists, the
Mostly
Portuguese and the
economic.
Spanish, they started off just trading posts. All the colonies started off as just trading posts. They were just on the beach in Africa trading coconuts for guns or whatever, right? And then
But
eventually,
China's not a colonizer. Those countries eventually colonized Africa and took control of those lands. China's not doing anything like that.
right? Of course, that China is not colonizing, but I'm pretty sure that the for the investments that China is making in the DRC, I'm sure they're getting a very, very favorable deal on cobalt, for example,
Yes,
or other rare earths. So while it's not
yes.
colonialism, as in China is now the ruler of Cameroon, they are getting
Mm.
very, very favorable deals for these investments in infrastructure and that
Yeah,
sort of
like
thing.
an imperialism of
Right,
sorts. Yeah.
neo imperialism. We're at the stage of capitalism now where we can never go back to straight up colonialism, straight up domination of other nations. But what we can do is have other people rip us off financially. That's the stage of capitalism where we are now, where
And I think
these
that would
these
be
things
more
exist.
difficult to do under United States of Africa with
I
that
doubt it. I
unitary
doubt it.
front.
I doubt it. I doubt it. Come on now. I know you're a smart man, Tim. You saw the report about the African Union having its wiretaps bugged by China, and the African
Yes.
Union building in Addis Ababa was built by Chinese money. You know this, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, and but again, yeah, th-
A-
but that's,
African leaders
in
right
terms
now.
of,
Go ahead. Go
again,
ahead.
going back to the original point about, the growing influence on political ideology and thinking. Yeah, that situation with that example of the African Union. Yeah, it was a violation. And it's, yeah, that situation where the African Union contracted this Chinese company, and then I think state actors like got involved, and they caught, they took advantage of that situation. And but then, yeah, that's a situation. China doesn't only do that in Africa; they do
Of
that
course they do. They do it
like
everywhere.
everywhere. They're
But
doing it in the USA a lot.
no, of
You
course they.
always read about, like, the hackings of, like, trade secrets, and so many other things. So that's something they do. Whether they'll be very effective at it or not is another matter. And again, when I just kind of look at what's happening right now, the evidence like on the ground, yeah, China's, yeah, I'd say, yeah, if we want to kind of focus more on how to, kind of what to be cognizant of when dealing
Mhm.
with China. I think it'd be, yeah, more focus on the economy and uh, national security versus the political ideological influence.
There's no
I'm
business
not
done.
seeing that on the ground.
There's no business done without influence. There's no trade deal done. There's not
Yeah,
even any sort of transaction done that does not also come with some sort of influence. So
yeah, but
China's
I just
business.
don't think I
Oh,
don't think that China really, like. Okay, there are some
listen, man,
schools
just say
being
you're
set
getting a
up.
check from
There
China.
are
Come
schools
on.
being set up, but whether they're really, committed to trying to, you know influence and, kind of feed this new way of political thinking and these kind of Chinese ideals and values to
Stop,
Africa.
stop,
I don't
Tim,
know if they care
Tim,
about that much, because
Tim,
I haven't seen anything supporting that. Like,
Tim.
what, you know what I mean? Like, on
You
a,
know,
like,
wait,
larger
Tim.
level, a lot of their dealings with Africa are economic. It's not
Tim,
political. That's why so many African nations deal with China in the first place, is because they don't do the politics.
Tim,
They'll do
but
business with
there's
anyone.
there's such a thing as goodwill, right? Like if the United States says, "Hey, Ghana, we want to build a school
Yes.
in the most isolated part of your country for nothing at all," that's going to generate goodwill. And China is trying to generate goodwill to make their side seem more attractive. Hey, America
Yes.
doesn't come and invest here, Angola. Hey, the EU doesn't
Yes.
invest here, Kenya, China.
Yeah.
We're here. Look at our system. This is what makes us successful. We're not colonialists. We're not racist. We're coming here trying to help you. Even if you say China is not trying to push it, it is still goodwill diplomacy that they're trying to do. And
Yeah.
it's that's fine. Every country does that. Every country in the world, major power does that. But we can't sit here and act like China is not trying to influence African policy or African the next leaders of
I mean,
Africa. Come on now. Come on now.
well, again, uh, I mean, where is this happening?
We,
How?
like I said, we don't know yet. We don't know
Do you
yet.
see what I mean? So this is. I'm not
But
necessarily saying
wait,
that
wait,
it's
wait, 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 wait,
impossible,
wait,
and
wait,
I'm completely
wait,
shutting it down.
wait,
But
wait,
I'm
wait,
just
wait.
going. Yeah.
Well, I have a good point. I have a good point to back up what I'm saying here. Back in the Cold War era, there was a guy from
Yeah.
Russia named Vladimir Putin who was sent to countries like Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, DRC to train the rebels to fight for their independence. When I was in Mombasa, my wife and I went to one of those cafes in no, not in Mombasa, in Dar es Salaam. We were in Dar es Salaam when we sat down in a cafe. We look up and there's a picture of Putin walking in Tanzania, and he ate at that same restaurant, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays, we're still seeing that goodwill towards Russia today with the coups in Niger and Mali and all of these guys. You know, I saw in Niger they are doing memorials for Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Nazi, and the other guy who was killed. Like the guys of Wagner were literal Nazis, but the Soviet Union did so much goodwill diplomacy and actual like helping Africans fight for their independence that black people now in Africa love Nazis now. We will not know what will happen with China until 10, 20 years from now. Like I'm saying, we don't know yet. You're saying, where's the proof? I don't have the proof yet, but I know that they are bugging the African Union. They're building a lot of roads, a lot of infrastructure. A lot of Africans go there to study. A lot of the future leaders of African nations will have come out of Chinese universities. Come on, man. Come on, man. Tim, are you getting paid by the Chinese? It's come on, man.
Um, but I guess there's cooperation and like learning from each other culturally, and then yeah, yeah, it's just the evidence on the ground. And again, I think China is more focused on the economy, and as I think the furthest it goes when it comes to politics is maybe the UN when it comes to like UN votes and the whole one China policy, which is essentially saying, if you want to do business and have diplomatic relations with China, you need to understand that the only China is the People's Republic of China, and
Not
there's no
Taiwan.
other. Yeah, no Taiwan, no Republic of China.
Think
So
about that, man.
there is that political aspect, but beyond that, in terms of espousing communist ideology or teachings and really making that a core part of their message and engagement with Africa, I just haven't seen that. And even regarding your point on Russia, um, yes, Russia does have a lot of influence across different parts of Africa. As to how that's directly influenced those different countries' political systems or their political makeup,
It's
I don't really know. I know
you.
that Russia, like, yeah, all different countries, their main concern when it comes to working with Africa is to, yeah, have like more bodies on their side to fight their corner against the West and the rest of the world. I think it's more like convenient bedfellows, and I don't know if they, yeah, you know, have that much. Yeah, I guess, yeah, I don't know if they are
Come
looking
on,
at it.
man. Like you just said, like China wants to promote their one China policy. You want to do business with us, ignore Taiwan, the democratic country, a country that, allows its people to have free
Yes,
elections and free media and freely criticize the government. Hate those
yeah,
people and you can do business with us. And then you're
yeah.
saying at the same time, oh, China's influence is not political. That's inherently
Uh,
political. That's
that's
inherently political. They
political, but
want African.
but
They want
that's that,
they want as many nations in the global south to be on China's side. They want as
Yes, yeah,
many.
and that's happened. That's already happened. That's been accomplished, and that is political, but that's not ideological. It's just it's
But
just a
that,
practical matter.
but
Like,
China
you
has
want
an
to do business
ideology.
with
China
us?
as a country
This
has
is
an
how it works.
ideology.
Just like how it is with all different countries. It's the same with all different countries. Like, if different African countries, want to do business with Turkey, and then all of a sudden they might say something like, "Oh, we recognize that Cyprus is a
Kurdistan.
part of Greece."
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Turkey will flip on those countries too. Every
Right.
country has certain red lines. But when we talk about, like the example you originally gave with the leadership academies and focusing on spreading communist ideology,
That's not
yeah,
happening. I admit that's not
I,
happening.
yeah, it's
I
not happening, and I don't think it would. I don't think, yeah, I think China's way in, China's game is the economy and the money, not really the ideology.
They want also the ideology that what their government does is okay and it's legitimate and it's for the betterment of people so that they can continue to do what they do. China has an ideology. China has an
Okay.
authoritative.
What's going
You
on
okay?
here?
You zooming in on your nose, man? What is this?
Uh,
What is this? Are you not embarrassed?
yes. Okay.
What is
I,
happening?
don't-
What is this?
I was trying to get something off the screen.
Oh God! Now we're looking at the hairline, man.
Oh,
That's
great.
crazy.
Oh, thank you.
Listen, man.
I'm hanging on to it. I'm hanging on to it.
Listen,
God.
no, your
Yeah.
hairline is nice. I wish I had it, man. But
Mhm.
no, seriously, seriously, come on now, come on now. China's every country has a sort of message that they want to push and an ideology
Yeah.
they want to push. And if we want better for Africa, we can't be saying, that we will stand behind China, you know, picking on Taiwan. Now, I do think that is there an
It's a
argument?
practicality because most nearly all countries do, and it's just that real politic is that matter of this is China. This is this huge economy. We rely on this country for a lot of different imports and machinery and technology, and people begrudgingly do, countries begrudgingly do it, and they just play ball with it because that's the game of leverage.
But
It's not
listen.
necessarily.
Let's get back to what got us here, talking
Yeah.
about China for the past 20 minutes. It was the idea that if there was a united Africa, it would be harder to influence and make
Yeah.
corrupt. And I find that very, very hard to believe. You're saying that a country where the majority of the democracies or the elected governments are made up of guys who have been in power for 30 and 40 years corruptly, or guys who have got there last week because him and his homies ran into the Capitol with Toyota pickup trucks and AR-15s. Now those guys are going to be the ones who cannot be unduly influenced in charge of a country of 1 billion people. And then you have Russia, the United States, China, and everybody else throwing money at them to make sure that they're on their side. Are you serious? It would be
I think
impossible for the United States of Africa, even if it is 1 billion people, the youngest continent, all the mineral wealth in the world, to not be swayed at the very
yes, yeah,
beginning
there
from
will be
corruption.
sway. All countries are swayed and influenced by other countries in different ways. I guess the main focus and concern is, to what degree, how much, we don't want it to come to a point where it's compromising our sovereignty or, working to our detriment.
Hmm.
When I say that a United States of Africa will be, I would see it as this: a United States of Africa would be more difficult to push around.
It would
That's
be
one thing I know.
it would
It
be
would be more
difficult.
difficult to push around. And I feel like, yes, when you're united with one front and one voice, I think that it makes you more difficult to be easily influenced and picked apart. Whereas, yeah, like, and I'll give you the perfect example. Quickly going back to China, that is one issue that I see where when I look at the dealings between China and Africa, I see all of the ways in which China is gaining so much economically and how, Africans are just getting like, just a small piece of that. And again, it's that situation where, yes, China has an Africa strategy, but Africa doesn't have a China strategy because they're all splintered across these different
Hmm.
countries and they're all trying to work with China and figure it out individually. Whereas in this
Right.
example, in this scenario, it would be as one. yeah, united front.
Hmm.
And again, look at China, look at India. These are countries with populations that would have a similar size to that of China. They're also huge. Um, India, to a larger extent, has a very diverse population already to begin with. And with all that said, yeah, those countries, they have their issues. They're not perfect, but they are influential and powerful,
Hmm.
and they're more influential and powerful as the nations they are now than if they were just broken up into smaller countries. And it's
Right.
a lot easier for them to unify. So yeah, I think United States of Africa would be harder to push around,
It,
and it would be
it would
easier for them
be.
to speak with one
It would.
voice
I
and
totally
one
did.
united voice.
I totally disagree that this would be an easy Nate. That this would be a hard nation to push around because number one, the secessionist movements within it would be insane. If there was a United States of Africa, all they have to do is funnel money to the South Sudanese once again, or to the Western Saharans once again, or just to any to the Boers in South Africa once again, to any group of people that feel like they are not a part of the dominant ethnic group. And let's be real, the dominant ethnic group probably of the United States of Africa would be tied between the Arabs or the Swahilis. And then possibly
I
if
don't
the
think there would be
demographics
any
could,
dominant ethnic group. I think that
and that
even
makes it,
those ethnic groups you use
and
there are very broad terms, particularly
and
within
that's
an African context. You
and
know,
that's
you have
what
the
and that's what would make it, and that's what would
Egyptians are very different from the Moroccans, and
right.
so on and so forth. So I think under a national model, yeah, it's very like yeah, that's a tricky one. It's very difficult to predict what the demographics would look like because now you're operating within a national model, and you don't know how you don't know what new groups will form
Right.
under that nation, especially when you have freedom of movement
I think
and
quickly.
you have people moving from different places, becoming more integrated, um, and what have you.
I think quickly what would happen is that the identities that would form would be the blacks and then the non-black Africans. There are millions of
I
Indians
don't
in
think so.
Africa.
I don't
I
think
think
so.
absolutely. No, 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 no.
I think
Let
that's
me
us.
finish. Let me
I think
finish.
that's us
Let,
approaching it.
let me cook. Let
Okay.
me cook. Let me cook.
Okay.
Let me get into it. Let me get into it. When we think about the identity of every nation in the world, even nations that are not built on ethnic identity, such as the United States and many nations in the Western world, there has been a dominance of a certain ethnic or racial group to make that nation whole in the beginning, right? When it was the United States, even though they started with the Enlightenment ideas that all people are created equal, they should be able to come together. Eventually, it ended up being a nation dominated by a white heterosexual male, minority that influenced with their ideas and culture, right? Blackness and whiteness are creations of that system of the colonialism of the past and up until this point. And as people travel, they understand their identity through otherization, whether they become othered or they make others the other. So when the Nigerian goes to Morocco, and maybe this is his first time living in a nation where he is not all surrounded by black people, he will very quickly realize that he is out of his comfort zone because people are othering him and he is possibly othering others, right? And that's what would quickly develop as people travel within Africa. That what the identity of the African is mostly associated with blackness today, because we're talking about Pan African identity and we're talking about mostly black nations, right?
Okay.
As people interact with each other, what we're going to find are that they're going to start othering each other and unifying around the most basic things. The Tunisian and the Libyan will realize they don't have that much they have that much difference when they start meeting the Cameroonian and the South African, if that makes sense, and vice versa for the other two groups. Does that make sense? I hope that was clear. That was a bit of a
No,
rant,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm just trying to
No,
make that
yeah.
very
Heard you
clear.
loud and clear. Like, cook, cook.
All right.
So yeah, I'd say going to your point about how yeah, so yeah, like Africanness and African identity. I don't know. I guess yeah, it's a question for Africans to answer, and I guess just from my experiences of being here and all of my different interactions are kind of, I don't feel like blackness. It's a part of African identity, but I don't think it's a core part. I feel like that's us approaching it from our kind, with our Western lens, which is, heavily racialized. When we think of the United States and Europe to a lesser extent.
I say that
So,
also. I say that because many of the North Africans don't consider themselves African because Africanness has been conflated to blackness, right? But that wasn't the main point. The point
I
is that
don't know.
the
Is
point.
it? Is that
Yep.
true? I don't
Yes.
know. I, I
Okay.
I know that they don't associate with Africans,
That's what I
and
meant.
blackness is tied into that. But I don't. Again, I don't know if that's the main reason. And again, yes, yeah, I think Africa is not it's not the West, it's not the United States.
No,
It's complex and it has its own situation. And I think in Africa,
you,
maybe with the exception of
you
some Southern African nations,
you said it. You said no,
race
no,
is
no.
not really yeah, race is
Because
not
they
approached
haven't,
or
right,
looked at in the way that it is in the West. And I
because
guess to the point of North
they don't
Africa,
have
just to quickly say, to the point of North
right.
Africa, um, yeah, again, if a Nigerian went to North Africa, again, it depends. That Nigerian might be a Muslim. He might be a Northern African Nigerian who goes there, and depending on what circles he's in or his affinity with that culture, he might feel right at home. Maybe a Cameroonian who's been doing lots of business with those particular countries and trade might feel at home when they go there. Like again, I don't entirely know about the North African context, but race, I don't think, I just don't know if race is the kind of like
What I'm
big
saying
deal,
is that,
original sin type of
but
thing that we would
because
get in the
what I'm
West when it
saying is
comes
that
to the
it will.
African
What
context.
I'm saying. What I'm saying. Firstly, what I meant to say is that it will be if there was a United
I
States of
disagree.
Africa. It absolutely would be because what happened with the Boers in South Africa? What happened with them? They brought race
But
there.
those were
With
Europeans, so they were
the
Europeans
Europeans,
that were
you know
coming
what
with those
I'm getting at
preconceived
there.
notions and
You,
cultures. North Africans
but
aren't
you know what I'm
Europeans,
getting
and
at
they
there.
have a
The
completely
South
different
African, the
African
South.
context. They are
Why
African.
does
They're from
why?
Africa. They've
No,
integrated. They've mixed with them.
no, no, they have not. What are you
They
talking
have.
about? No,
They
no,
have. They
stop.
have.
You tripping? You tripping? Listen, what
I'm
I meant
not.
to say. No, what I meant to say is this. What I meant to say is that if there was a United States of Africa, there would quickly become the conception of race, and I'm pretty sure, I'm more than certain that the same white supremacist thinking that infects the North Africans today, and there is no United States of Africa right now, would become even more prevalent. There would become white identity. The Moroccans, the Tunisians, and the Egyptians would all start identifying as, well, we're the white Africans of Africa. The same way that the European South
Yeah.
Africans, as you want to say, identify as such. That
But okay.
and that would be created. So,
So
and go ahead,
yeah.
go ahead, go
Okay,
ahead.
so yeah, I guess that's something interesting to explore. But yeah, speaking of like North African identity and you know that kind of alignment to whiteness and white proximity and self-identifying as white. Um, I feel like over time that kind of doctrine is starting to, I feel like over time it's becoming less prominent and influential. I feel like when I was growing up, um there was that distinction was much more clear between the North Africans and the rest of Africa. And you did have, people, even when I was growing up in the UK, they would refer to, oh, these Egyptians or whatever as kind of like white. Um, but then I think, yeah, again, you got like, times are changing, new generations, new culture. So I think there's that aspect that's coming in that's reducing its prominence. And secondly, the North Africans can't identify as white because the white countries don't allow them to anymore. We even actually saw that
No,
with the United States shortly after Trump got into power, where for a long time, if you look at it, you look at the census, there were changes made to it. There was a period for a very long time where North Africans were categorized under whites. And then recently they changed that. They gave them their own separate category. Um, the West don't see them as white anymore, so they can't even necessarily claim that like they could before. Oh, that's a question for the
I,
Africans in the room in terms of yeah, has North
they still
African
can. They still
proximity
can.
to
By the way,
whiteness and
by the way, by
identifying
the
with
way,
it
Chad. I just want everybody
stronger
to
now
know.
than it was 20 years ago?
I just want everybody to know. I just did a quick Google search. Google search. Can
Yeah,
Egyptians identify as white on U.S. Census? They still can. This is from census.gov. Facts.
really?
So, yes, people
Okay.
from North Africa can identify as white. And the reason the white supremacists continue to expand the categories of what is white is because whiteness continues to become smaller and smaller in actual numbers. We see
But we're
that
talking about Africa.
the rise of melanated people across the world is making the white supremacists continue to have
But we're
to
talking
expand.
about Africa. It's not
We're
about
talking.
white people. It's Africa.
What there are
That's another
There
thing.
are white Africans, Tim. There are white Africans. As we.
Very few of them. It's not
What are you
African. So
talking
that's the
about?
thing.
Very few.
White,
What are
the
you?
conversation of white supremacy doesn't really. That's not the
How does wait?
conversation that Africans are having because it's
How
not
does the
relevant
conversation
for
of
the
white
most part.
supremacy? How does the conversation of white supremacy not matter in a conversation about a continent that was divided by white supremacists?
That was. Now again,
How does the
Africa.
conversation
When
about
you go
white
to Africa
supremacy
today,
not
there are
matter in a
barely any
country that is
white people
dominated
there.
by neocolonialist white
White people
supremacists?
don't own this continent anymore. Those days are
Really?
gone. It's
Who
not
are the
about
richest
them.
Who are the richest South Africans? Who are the
Yeah,
richest
that's South
South
Africa.
Africans?
Yeah, that's in South Africa. That's not the whole of Africa. Again, you've traveled across Africa. You've gone to Kenya. You've gone to these different places.
And
You
who are
know
the
those
richest people
places
there?
are
Who are the
like
richest people? They are Indians. They are
and
Chinese.
blacks
They
and blacks. In
very
most of these
few,
African countries, the richest people are the Africans
very
because
few,
they are
very.
most of the people. There are
While they
barely any
okay,
white
okay.
people in Africa.
While there are a majority of Africans who are the wealthier people there is a, how can I say this, a larger percentage of people who make up a very small percentage of the population who own a lot of the wealth there. The Indians, probably in Tanzania, are maybe 1 or 2% of the population. But I guarantee you, if we look it up, if we looked at the statistics, 30% of the richest people in Tanzania will probably be Indian, probably be Chinese, and probably some
Okay.
other foreign ethnic group to Africa, which is fine. I am not saying that the Indians are not as African. If you're an
That's
Indian
one
who's been born
country.
and raised in Dar es Salaam, it's not coming across as that. But we have to be real here. That
It's
when it
not
comes to
rare though, because again, you have certain Southern African countries like yes, South Africa, Namibia.
where,
Yeah,
where,
South Africa
where
and Namibia.
Namibia,
Yes, and then again, I don't
there are
know
white people in
the most
Zambia as
when it
well.
comes to Tanzania.
Hmm.
Zambia, I've visited Zambia.
There are white people in
I
Kenya
wouldn't.
too.
No. They're not. They don't have the numbers. They're like less. You could check the numbers. There might be less than 100,000 white people. Maybe a little more than that.
Would
They
you?
don't have. They
Would
don't
you?
have. They're not.
Would
They're
you?
not a thing. They don't have
Would you?
power here. It's not their
We.
continent anymore.
I met a blonde hair, blue eyed Kenyan lady, blonde hair, blue
Yes.
eyed Kenyan lady in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. You
Yeah.
might say there's 100,000. You might say there's 100,000 white people in Kenya. How much would you bet that all of those white people are doing much better financially than the average Kenyan?
No, yes, they are. But then there's a
Have,
difference between being a
is there
financial elite and being a controlling elite. So, for example, we can look at London or we can look at the USA. Yes, within the USA, when we think of like say Chinese Americans or Asian Americans in general, many of them do better off than most Americans, including white Americans. And that's not
but
just the Asian
but
Americans.
we
We
know
also have
why that
like the
happens. That's a
Nigerian
part of but that's a
Nigerian
part of the
Americans are another example. So
but
they are
that's what white supremacists
yeah,
don't
they're
want.
they're a wealthy elite, but
But
they
that
don't. That's different to
but
them
that's a part of
having
the brain
power.
drain, Tim. That's a part of white
But
supremacists brain drain.
my point
That's
is
a
to your point though. Asians in America who represent like 5-6% of the population, which is a much larger percentage compared to the number of whites in Africa, way larger. There's nowhere near as many as that. You have them who, yeah, they do better off than most people on average, but we wouldn't necessarily say that they control America or they control the country or they have all of this influence. They don't. And it's a similar thing with Africa in terms of, yes, when it comes to the whites who are there and the Indian who are spread throughout Africa, yes, they generally do better off than the typical person in that country. But whether they're the ones who, own all of the largest companies and all of the, and, all of so much of the land and stocks and shares, no. Yeah, I,
Once again, going back to
white,
what I said earlier,
white
once again
people are
going
not a
back,
thing in
there is
Africa.
no there is no deal, there is no trade, there is no transaction without power. And with capital
Yes,
comes power. The
yes.
richest, those rich white Kenyans, as minimal as they might
They
be,
don't have the
without
power.
a doubt, without a doubt, if you have money, you can pay politicians. Every Kenyan politician is no different than any American politician. They go to the richest people in their country to get funding for their campaign. It's almost without a doubt, the richest people in Kenya might majority be black, but
Yes.
a good large percentage of those people will be white.
I don't think so. No, no, it's not.
You
That's
said
not true. I
earlier,
don't think
wait,
so.
I have to ask you a question. I'm gonna
Mm.
ask you a question. You said there's maybe 100,000 white Kenyans, but you're pretty
Yeah,
sure all of them are more than well off, right?
yeah, yeah. On average, yeah,
There's probably maybe 100,000 black people in, let's say, Lithuania. Do
yeah.
you think the 100,000 black people, by and large, are doing better than the average Lithuanian?
I don't know.
No,
They could be. I don't know. Again,
Tim.
look at Nigerian Americans
Whoa,
in
Tim.
America.
Tim, how come
Nigerian
you wait? How come
Americans
you
do
wait?
better. They do better
Wait,
than
wait.
the average
I'm gonna get to
American.
that. I'm gonna really attack that because
It's
that's a
not
white supremacist.
impossible.
That's a white
And
supremacist talking point.
I'll give you an example, another
Wait, no,
example
answer.
to build
Wait.
on
I
that.
have a question. How come you were
Yeah.
so sure that the white Kenyans were doing so much better? Why?
Because I know I've met them. I know I'm familiar with it. I know that they do well off, but they don't do well off
all
to the
right.
point.
Let's go
At
to
the end
what
of
you're
the day, they still
familiar
got to
with.
pay off the
Let's go to
government.
what you
If
let's
they
go to
piss
what
off the wrong person, they might get put in jail. They might get kicked out of the country, and that happens. They
that
don't
could
have that
happen.
much power.
That could hypothetically happen. That
It
could
does
hypothetically.
happen. It
Let's
does
go to
happen.
what you're familiar with. There
Mm,
are a million. I think I looked this up the other day. There's about 1.5 to 2 million black people in the UK, including multiracial people. Right?
yes.
Are the 1.5 million black people who make up a small minority doing
Mm,
better than the average white, indigenous, Anglo-Saxon by and
no,
large?
but
No,
I'll
not
give
at
you
all.
another example. Let me
Wait.
give you another example. Can I give you one?
Go
Yes.
ahead. Go
So
ahead. Go ahead
let's
now.
do China. Yes, let's actually do China to really flip it on its head. Because, yeah, I would argue, and yeah, when you really look into it, there is legitimacy behind it in terms of when you look at the average black person in China, the everyday African, the black community within China, which I'm not completely sure of the numbers, but maybe before COVID, it might have been like quite a few 10,000, maybe 100,000 plus, like within that region. I think now it's much lower because a lot of foreigners have left China. But the point is, let's say, yeah, 100,000 blacks, in China. Yeah, many are students. Some are also doing business and they're working. And yep, yeah, it was kind of that situation in terms of the Africans who were there in China, the way that they lived, the opportunities they had, the type of money they made, their network, their family connections, they were better off than the everyday Chinese. The everyday Chinese is, someone who might be in a second or third tier city, or they're in the countryside and they're just, working and hustling to make like their little seven, to make their six or seven, $800 a month.
Hmm.
That's their story. So,
Right.
it is that situation again. Those Africans, they had, yeah, yeah, they had, on average, they had, they were making a bit more money and they had opportunities to make money easier compared to Chinese, where they could go and teach English or they could go and work as a club rep. They could just, and that was something that a lot of African students did, where they would work as club reps to like get people to come along and party with them, and then they take those people to these clubs, and yeah, the money that they made, it wasn't like crazy money, but it was more than what the average Chinese person was making for what was quite like simple work. So yes, they, on average, they had the money and they were doing better off, but that didn't necessarily mean that, they don't control China. Their numbers are too small, and it's just on an absolute level, it's not large enough to influence. And
Right,
that's
of
what I'd
course.
say, at least within Africa, when you look at the white or the non-African, or no, sorry, the white population, um, within Africa, it's too small to really register that influence. Maybe if you're talking about European countries like the UK, France, and the USA, that's another conversation. But as
And
far as
let's have
whites
that
within
conversation
Africa,
because that's the conversation we're
the
talking about.
influence is not
That's
there.
that what the conversation we're having is on both. And within Africa, within South Africa, within Kenya, within many places and spheres in Africa, we can almost guarantee with every white minority there, they are doing much, much better financially than the regular people, the indigenous black people who live there, right? It's good to hear that the African traders are doing well in Africa. That's good to hear. But that only bolsters the point that I was going to say to you earlier. You asked me, why are the Asians, the Indians, and even the Nigerians making more money than the average American, whatever an American is? The reason why is because America sources the most intelligent, bright, educated people from those countries and asks them to stay in the country to make it attractive for our country to continue to grow economically. That's the reason why, Tim. Don't repeat this
Yeah,
white supremacist talking point because this is what they say all the time. They say, well, the Asians prove that this isn't a racist country because we just got the smartest, best Asians to come here and prove to
that
y'all.
wasn't my
Wait,
point.
wait, 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 wait,
Yeah.
wait. This America cannot be racist. The world cannot be white supremacist.
Mm.
We just got the absolute best Nigerian and rejected the 1,000 other applicants for U.S. visas and made them come here to be our doctors, not doctors in Nigeria. Are you serious, Tim? Are you serious? You can't be
I,
saying this. White
I
supremacy.
agree with you there, but that
What do you?
wasn't my point.
That was your point. You were saying
It
that,
wasn't.
yeah,
It wasn't.
racism and race and white
No,
supremacy
no, it
doesn't
wasn't
have an
about
effect.
racism. It was about the influence of a particular group. As you were saying, within Africa, you believe that the whites have like quite a large outsized influence,
If
and
we're
maybe
talking about if we're talking
you
about
said
like you
whites
said
within
about the
Africa.
United States, about Russia, about
No,
Europe
whites
as a
within
whole.
Africa. Whites within Africa, because yeah, in the African context, is like what I was trying to say is the African context and the African conversation, race plays a very minor role in it. From I mean,
No,
yeah,
it
that's what
doesn't.
I
No,
believe.
number
Race
one,
plays
no,
a very minor
no,
role in it.
no. Number
And
one,
then
no, it does.
and then what I was trying when I made that point about the Chinese Americans, it had nothing to do with like the racism of model minority. It was just me saying the facts are that this particular group, when it comes to their jobs and their professions and their incomes, they were doing better off on average than most of the population. So they are like a relatively affluent elite, but that doesn't mean they're a controlling elite. That's why I gave that example. I'm saying, okay,
And I
the
would
Asian
argue that if you're
Americans
an
are doing
affluent,
really well in
if
America, but they don't control America. They're not the ones that the heads of these tech companies. They're not the ones filling all the positions in government. They don't even really have that much of a big corporate voice.
number one,
They
the
do
number
well and they do their thing, but they don't control the country. And that's this. And yes, that's Asian Americans,
number
where they're
no,
5% of the U.S. population. Whites within Africa are way, way smaller. Maybe
no,
not even a percentage.
number one, I think the controlling elite of any country are the people with the guns. So I think we need to get past this idea because I'm not one of those people that say, man, they're controlling us, bro. The only people that control America are the Catholics, and they're sick. That's a different topic. When it comes to outsized influence, that cannot be divorced from affluence. And the white people in Africa, because they have outsized affluence, which you said in the interview that we did together, has been situated and created in a country like South Africa or in any other place where there is a white minority that is indigenous to that place. It's there unnaturally. The wealth that they have has been knocked out of whack. Your own words. If you have
Yeah.
affluence within a country, you have undue influence. Even if you don't exercise it politically, you exercise it economically. The white man in Botswana who owns a diamond mine that he stole from that was stolen by his great granddaddy, and he now employs Africans and pays them $2 a day to go into the earth and extract raw minerals from their hands. They're exercising influence. So while you're
Mm.
saying they're not a controlling elite, I would say any sort
Yeah.
of affluence, especially outsized for a particular small minority, is outsized influence. They are not
It's an
controlling
outsized
elite.
influence, but
I
not a
don't believe in a
controlling
controlling
influence.
elite. I just want to make this very clear for the
Mm.
chat, for everybody watching. There is no such thing as a controlling elite. There is no such
Yes,
thing as a
there is. Yes,
controlling
there is.
elite.
So, for
No.
example, let's take Kenya. Let's look at Kenya, okay? The fact of the matter is, the whites do not control Kenya. They do not really have that much of a big voice or influence when it comes to the main shakers and movers who do control and influence that country. As far as the groups go and their influence in commerce, politics, culture, and education, it's not white people. And if you ask Kenyans, yeah, if you ask Kenyans, you pose what I've just said, who controls or has the most outsized influence when it comes to your country in all of these different areas? No Kenyan is going to tell you, or very
I
few Kenyans
I
will say white people.
I
Because
want
so yes, when you gave that example of yes, South Africa and Botswana in Southern Africa, it's more so like that. But Southern Africa is not Africa.
I want to
Beyond
make
that,
this very
again,
clear.
you go to Ghana and you
I
go to
want to
these places, there are no white people in these
I want to
places. There's
make this
very
very
few.
clear. I want to make this very clear for anybody watching right now or anybody who will watch into posterity. I know because I went to Kenya myself, and also logically, it does not make sense for me to say that white people are the controlling, dominating elite of a 99.9% black country. What I am saying is this, and I am making this explicitly clear for not only Tim, but everybody else who will watch this or is watching this now. White people that do exist in Kenya or that come to Kenya that do business, they will earn and they will generate so much wealth that they will have outsized influence because of their affluence. They will
Yes.
hire people. They will fire
Yeah.
people. If they are wealthy enough, they will donate to politicians and political causes. They will
Yeah.
open businesses, close businesses, buy
But other
homes,
groups will have more outsized
be
influence.
your landlord. That's what I'm saying.
But other groups
Of course.
will have
What I
more
just want to
influence.
pardon.
But other groups will have more outsized influence.
I
So
know. That's why
yes,
I brought up.
you'll
That's
have
why I brought up.
you'll
Wait,
have
wait, 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 wait.
whites in their corner. They're competing for their voice, and there's going to be a lot of other people, including the Arabs or the Yoruba or the Igbo or the Kikuyu or the Mandingo or the
Li-
Crew people that are also going to have their voice. They're going to be competing,
Listen. This is what I
and there's
also
a
want
lot
to
more of them than those guys. Way
listen.
more.
I want to make this very clear. I said this explicitly earlier. That's why I brought up the Indians and the Chinese and all the other people because for anybody who has not been to Africa, when you go to Africa and you rent your Airbnb, or you're going to a restaurant and then you see the owner, or
Yeah,
if you look at who's driving the Mercedes and the Benzes, when you go
yeah,
there, everybody who's watching this right now, you will see that the guy you gave your money to in the Airbnb was not a black African. You will see
yes,
that the guy driving a Mercedes Benz is most likely not a black African. They might be Indian, they might be Chinese,
yeah.
they might look light skinned and might be mixed with something else, but they are not 100% indigenous. A lot of the time, not even the majority of the time. I don't want anybody getting it confused. I am
I
not
think it might
saying
be the
I am not
majority of the time. I
I,
actually agree with you there. In South
right.
Africa, yeah,
I saw this in Kenya. I did not give money to the hundreds of places I stayed, and I traveled all through Kenya and Tanzania. I
mm,
did not give money one time for an Airbnb I rented to a black hand, once. And you can ask my wife.
okay.
We
I
stayed in
did.
about.
I have.
Okay, you might have, but I think you did that in Rwanda. Be real, you ain't do
No,
that.
no, no. In
You ain't do
Kenya,
that in
I
Kenya.
was in Kenya for 2 years, and the overwhelming majority of my dealings, whether it's been with where I rented, Airbnbs, who I bought things from and done business have been, yeah, yeah, with Kenyans. And yeah, there's been, you get some Arab and Indian Kenyans, but overwhelmingly it's been, yeah, black Kenyans. And
Right.
also, yeah, I guess building on this point. So what you said in terms of in South Africa, you go to the Airbnbs and the dominance of, one particular group. Yes, and that's what you have there. And to one of the comments here, so yes, I think yeah, we didn't mean to offend you, Aussie. What I meant when I said Southern Africa is not Africa is I meant sorry, Africa. There's much more to Africa than Southern Africa. Southern
Mhm.
Africa is one particular region that is home to like I don't know, maybe 90 or 100 million people. So it's a relatively small part of the African story. When you leave Southern Africa and you go to other parts of Africa, and I'm sure the people watching can attest to this, those other places are not like South Africa. It's not the people who are riding the Mercedes Benz and are going to the country clubs and are doing well for themselves are overwhelmingly Africans a lot of the time. Again, just just look and just watch the
But guess
videos.
what?
Look at who's the most richest
Let
people
me
in those countries, and who
for
do you
for
see?
the chat, I have to say you will see a lot of rich black people at at the golf club and the country clubs in Africa, right? But
Yes,
guess where you will see the most Indians and white people and Chinese you will ever see in your life in Africa? At the golf club, at the country club, at the most expensive restaurants. You
but
walk into the you wait
there's more
you
Kenyans. That's the whole point. So even the country, when I
wait
went to there was a country club that I attend and go to in Mombasa, and yes, they were quite. Yeah, there was like 30%. Like it was definitely outsized, but yeah, no,
Yes, exactly.
most of the
But
golfers, most of
You
the
walk through the
golfers,
slums of Kigali, you
most of
walk
the
through the slums
golfers.
of Mombasa, you walk through the slums of Dar es Salaam, you won't see a white face or an Indian face at all. All you
But
see
that's
are black poverty.
but
Black poverty.
uh, yeah, well, but okay, again, I guess going back to the point I'm making, which is they don't own the continent. They're
You,
not a game changer, and they're not an
how,
influential group. They're just
how
not.
can you how
And
can you say how
other
can you just
Africans can
say
tell you that.
you went to the country club and saw all the rich people there in any other
Yeah.
city? And wait, come on, Tim, let's be real. If you
Mm,
were in the UK at a country club and you
yes.
saw all the rich people there, you would definitely
Mm,
say, oh, these are the movers and shakers, these are the
yes.
big baller shot
Yes.
callers of Nottingham.
Yeah.
If but when we say, oh, I saw 30% of the country club in
Mm.
Kigali was European or Indian or
Mombasa. Yeah.
Chinese or mixed or Lebanese, you're not gonna say, oh, those are the big baller shot callers. Those aren't. Oh, they're nobody. They don't run anything. They don't run anything. Come on,
Well,
man.
again, the country club is just one example, and again,
But it,
that
you
that's something. That's
don't
something that.
don't
Can I? I'm going to make the comment.
go
So
ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
that's
Sorry. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. That's something you get everywhere. So even within the UK, if you go to, I guess I haven't gone to them myself, but then, yeah, from other places that I've visited and gone to and worked at, yeah, when you go to some of those really elite circles, it's not completely white. No, so yeah, if you went to those country clubs, even the same with like the different elite schools and academies, you get yeah a lot of people coming from China, Russia, different Arab states, even within London. Yeah, Arabs, Russians, they they own a lot of property, and in terms of it's an outsized influence. But again, whether they control the country, whether they really make politics tick or not is another matter. And I'd say generally they don't. They're just part of a rich elite. Do you know what I
Mhm.
mean? Just that's like how in
Oh,
like the UK, yeah, like that country club, even those private schools, you'll see a lot of Nigerians there. Like,
a
there's a
rich
lot of
a
there
rich
are a
elite.
fair few rich Nigerians in the UK. And when I mean,
I know that,
and there's
bro.
a
We
lot of
know
them.
that. We know
Yes,
that.
yes.
But
And they are
the
part of that
Nigerians
elite,
by and large,
but they don't control the country.
The Nigerians by and large do not control the country at all.
Yeah, and the
They
whites
do
by
not.
and
And
large do not. The whites within Africa by and large do not control Africa.
No,
It's just
once again,
they don't.
we are eliminating the word control. Control is
Yeah,
eliminated here. We know that
yeah,
by sheer numbers they could not control. I want everybody to know this. If Tim
yeah.
continues to say control, that's on him. I am not
Okay.
saying at all
Yeah,
white people within Africa control Africa. White
yeah,
supremacists outside of Africa do dictate to Africa. That's a fact. That's a fact. But what happens in Africa is that a lot of non-black people have outsized influence on Africa. The richest people who are non-black
mm.
in every country, the richest people by and large in every black country in Africa are non-black.
Yeah, yeah.
Not the
Again,
majority, but a good amount.
yeah.
A good amount.
Again, I guess for me, yeah, yeah, I'm not necessarily gonna fixate on that point because yes, they have an outsized influence. I mean, technically speaking, me as a digital nomad, living in Africa and living in the way that I do and earning what is seen as a relatively high salary, um, somebody can say that me and my group of English speaking digital nomads have an outsized influence. Like, yes,
Mhm.
different minority groups,
No, you're not
across
entrenched.
different strata
There's
have their
different.
outsized influence. And yes, the non-blacks within Africa do have an outsized influence. That's true. However, what I'm saying is, it's that's not yeah, that's not the meat and potatoes of the issues that we need to think about regarding the United States of Africa.
That's fine.
It's yeah, yeah,
That's fine. That's fine. I want to clarify because I think people might think I just say shit out of my mouth and it doesn't mean anything. I meant it when I said that the white supremacists outside of Africa dictate to Africa. And there have been several examples of this throughout history. We don't have to look that far back, but let's start with Muammar Gaddafi. Imagine, if you will, that an African coalition of nations decided that they were going to kill Tony Blair and send
yeah,
drone strikes to kill Tony Blair. That was a coalition of the Caucasian persuasion saying that we are going to dictate to an African nation. Let's think about apartheid in South Africa. The white supremacists outside of it, on both sides of the political spectrum, the communist and the capitalist world, the free world, whatever, said the white South Africans can do whatever they wanted to the black South Africans as long as they did not become communists. Stay away
yeah.
from the communists, and we will make sure that you can continue to dominate black lives. It was not until the end of the Cold War that the white supremacists said, "Hey, you got to stop that shit. You have to stop it." Every other example has constantly been of African nations being bullied, being put in bad trade deals, being not allowing African citizens to get the proper visas and transport to move and better their lives outside of Africa. These are all effects of white supremacist colonialism, the division of our nations, the neo-colonialism that happens now. We cannot look at Africa today and say that white supremacy does not have an effect on these African nations. There's a reason why. There's a reason why none of these African nations can refine the gold, the diamonds, the cobalt that comes from the earth there. It's because they cannot get the funding, they cannot get the loans from the banks to actually build the factories that they need to get this sort of stuff done. And as we know, because of the history of colonialism and white supremacy on the world, the majority of wealth is congregated towards the top of a few people who do not look like us, meaning that they pull the purse strings of what is allowed to happen and how people are allowed to develop. There's a reason why Africa has to beg China for money and loans. And there's a reason why these African nations are some of the poorest on earth, though they are the richest in mineral wealth. That's all I have to
Um,
say about that.
okay, so I'd say to that, um, yeah, yeah, that's a tricky one. Again, I just when it comes to yeah, just the conversations that Africans are just having, everyday conversations or higher level political, you know, more existential and intellectual questions. Um, yeah, they're just yeah, they're not talking about white supremacy. Like It's again, I think that's maybe us looking at it from our kind of perspective, but race, because yes, Africa is mostly African. You know, you go to Kenya, even in a country like Kenya that is relatively like multiracial, it's still that sort of where if you see someone who's not black, it's like people stop and stare because there's like, there's barely any of them around. So they're just, they have an outsized influence, but you know, I think the conversations, if I think of the real big issues and the conversations that need to be had in Africa, I think it focused more on maybe like, I don't know, corruption, tribalism, religion. I feel like those are like the more pressing and hot topic issues that are like dividing Africans rather than race in general,
I
with
never
the
said
exception of a few countries.
I never said race was dividing Africa. I was saying that white supremacy is suppressing Africa. I want to make this very clear. Of course, people in a mostly black nation are not going to be talking about racism, anti-black racism, because this is one of the few places in the world where black lives are safe from anti-black racism. What I am saying is that the countries, the societies as structures are under threat from white supremacist violence and white supremacist terrorism and the hegemony of powerful nations which tend to all skew to be white. What I'm saying is, when I gave the first example about Muammar Gaddafi, is that
Yeah,
African heads of state, no African head
yeah.
of state is safe. No African nation truly has sovereignty. No African on planet Earth, no black man on planet Earth has true freedom from the violence that white supremacy can inflict on us. And what I'm saying is that if there is to be a United States of Africa or something of the sort, we first have to identify that the biggest threat to black life is white supremacist violence.
Not in Africa. It's just not true.
It's not true, but they killed Gaddafi. It's not true, but they allowed apartheid. It's
I
not true,
mean,
but the richest, but they.
African
What are
most
you talking
most of the
about, man?
killing and the wars and the fighting is done it's local, it's internal, it's yeah. Maybe back, when colonialism, yeah, when there was colonialism, you're definitely right about what you're saying in terms of white supremacy was the number one, or such a big issue, affecting and afflicting Africa. But in terms of, yeah, the violence and instability that you see happening in Africa now, that's, yeah, that's,
Is it white?
related to
Is it white supremacy?
religion, tribal conflicts, and yeah, part of those tribal
Who
conflicts
said?
do stem from colonialism and what have you. But
Listen,
yeah,
man. Let me ask you.
that's, it's
Would the,
still Africans who are doing it,
would
It's
would
not white people
let me
who are like literally putting a gun to the, like, most of the
let me
time
ask
it's
you
not.
this. Let me ask you this. Would 100,000, would more than 100,000, possibly millions of black bodies be at the bottom of the Mediterranean right now if they were, you know, Ukrainian? Would there be? Would there be? Would there be this
No,
migrant crisis? Would they
no,
allow
no,
black
no, no, there
people?
wouldn't
Would
be.
they allow black
There
people to
wouldn't be.
drown at the
No,
rates they do? What is
no.
that?
But then
What
if
is
you
that?
want,
Is that not
no,
white supremacy in effect? What's
no,
happening right
no.
today?
No, that's it's not as simple
Okay,
as that, because I'd
so
say
what
to
is it?
answer that question, you have to bear in mind, naturally, Europeans have a preference for other Europeans. It's the same way that within Africa,
We
okay,
don't. They don't
if
have a
we,
preference for Africa.
if
No, 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 they
no,
don't.
I'm going to make the point within Africa, just like what's going on in Sudan, you have the civil conflict that is happening, and many of them are beginning to migrate to neighboring countries, as war refugees. They're fleeing, and yes, they're fleeing to their neighbor. Maybe it's tens of thousands, potentially more, and yep, that neighbor is gonna be more willing to help a neighbor versus Europeans. Like, yeah, if in terms of what's going on in Sudan and how they are migrating to these surrounding nations, or in the past when you had different conflicts in Central Africa and you had, migrants fleeing to many different parts, or even what happened here in Rwanda 30 years ago, and how different migrants flee to parts of Kenya, parts of Burundi, Tanzania. Um, yeah, they show they express preference for their neighbors. Like if I don't know, hundreds of thousands or millions of white people try to like flee to Africa to claim refuge, they, they wouldn't let that happen.
Oh
They
yes, they
wouldn't.
would. Oh yes, they
No, they
would. Oh
wouldn't.
yes, they would.
No, they
Oh yes,
wouldn't
they
because
would.
they're not
They would.
doing it. Like
No,
they
yes,
would not.
yes, they
They would
would.
not.
No, stop it.
They
Because
would not.
first and foremost, the country you're in, Rwanda, signed two deals with the UK to try to accept migrants. So stop that. That's number
No,
one. They
but I'm
tried to.
talking about what I'm saying is if within the next year you had hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians or other white Europeans fleeing to Africa en masse or a particular set of African countries, I don't know if they would necessarily
No,
just welcome them with open
they would be
arms and say,
accepted.
please
They,
come here. Because
they
even
would
when
be
you look at the
accepted.
immigration policy, you look at the immigration policies of these different African countries, and it does not even say that. It's not
I
even
don't know.
that
I don't know.
opening or embracing.
Umbutu gonna smash that
So
Svetlana.
yeah,
I don't know. You talking crazy. Umbutu gonna
it's
smash
true.
that
You could
Svetlana.
check.
Stop it.
You could
No,
check.
stop
It's
it.
not
Stop it.
immigration is tough in Africa. For
Stop
example, you can marry, for example, in Kenya, you can marry a person, marry a lady or marry a guy, whatever, and yeah, you have to wait for like a good few years, like 3, 4 years before you can apply for a
Stop it.
green card. But then in the
Stop it.
UK, you
Stop it.
don't have to do that. So
Stop it.
yeah, no, they wouldn't. They wouldn't just welcome them
Stop
with
it. Stop it.
open arms and be
Number
like, "Yeah,
number
come over." They'll
number
do that
one.
for their neighbors because naturally they have more connection and affinity, and that's what. There is racism there, but I don't think it's the driving factor behind that preference for Ukrainians. It's just the fact of like, oh, these
No.
Ukrainians are fellow Europeans,
No.
and Ukraine, when it comes to their location and what they mean to Europe, they are naturally going to be, yeah, their issues are more pressing because it's closer to home.
Did the EU? I'm going to ask you this: did the EU or not have a part of its law saying that anybody who is seeking asylum as a migrant should be accepted at the border? Was that a part of EU law? Any
Yeah,
migrant.
I'm not too sure, but I guess if I'll take your word for it. But yeah, that's EU law. How it works
That's
with different countries
right.
who have their own sovereign government. Remember, the EU wouldn't be the United States of Africa. The EU could put out
Right.
these directives and these aspirations,
Right.
but there's how it works on the national level. And you know what? Yeah, different nations have their priorities and just and yeah, yeah, immigration is a blurred issue.
It's not a blurred issue
Just because
because wait.
somebody's tough against immigration doesn't make them racist. Because again,
No, it's not. It is
immigration
a. No.
immigration is not the most open and free in most of Africa.
It is.
Again,
It is. It is not a
it,
blurred issue when people are saying, we need to build a wall against Mexico, or we need to, build a wall against the Strait of Gibraltar, or that sort of thing. But then when it's time for Ukrainians to escape, they are doing programs saying, invite a Ukrainian into your home. There was
yeah,
never a program. There was never a program saying invite a Nigerian into your home, invite a
but
Syrian
why?
into your
Why
home.
should there be? Why should there be?
Because
Like, let's look at it
first and foremost
realistically in terms of like, think of it as families.
because
Think
first
of
and
it as
foremost
families.
because first and foremost we're all human beings. I think we can both agree that
Yes.
humanitarianism should extend to all people regardless of race, and to say that Europeans should, or it's understandable for them to preference other Europeans, is admitting their own racism. How are you
I
missing this
don't know
part?
if that's racism. Like
That
we
is
have
racist
families.
to
People
to
prioritize their own
to
family over others. As nations are going
Ukrainians
to
and French are as
prioritize their
different.
neighbors
Ukrainians and French
over
are as different as
those who are
Spanish
not their
and
neighbors.
Nigerians. Are you serious right now? The Ukrainians and the French have nothing in common other than white skin. So you're saying that
No,
because they have
no,
the
they
only
have way
one that
more in common than that. They're from the
not
same
really,
continent. There's
but
like religion, particular
one
like
is Roman Catholic,
literature,
the
even
other
language
is
at
Eastern.
times.
One
There
is Roman
is,
Catholic, the
and
other
there's
is
also the
Eastern
security
Orthodox. One
issue.
speaks a Slavic language, one speaks a Romance language. One is used to a nation that's multi-ethnic, multiracial, and as a democracy, and the other one is from a corrupt dictator like mafia state. What in common do they have other than being white? To say that the Ukrainians should be preferenced over the Nigerians in terms of humanitarian aid is admitting
I'm
the
not
own
saying it
racism
should.
of the
Okay, yeah,
Europeans
I didn't
because
say
you're
it
saying
should.
that
I
they
said no,
have
you should, but that's the way it is.
no,
It's not
but
just
that's
the
racism.
Europeans
You
who are
should
like
admit
that.
that's racism. You should
Everybody
admit
is
that's
like that.
racism. That is
Everybody is like
racism.
that.
No,
It's
not
not just
everybody
the
is like that.
Europeans.
I'm not like that. I'm not like that.
Yeah,
Chat, put your
but
hand up if you're not
nations and
like that.
people in general are. So I'll give you an example. For example, when we talk about Africa, okay, and recently the president of Kenya announced that Africans can travel to Kenya without a visa. You know, he made this announcement, and you know he's making the process much simpler. But again, and he used the term African diaspora, and what in terms of who the policy applies to, it applies to citizens of African countries. It doesn't apply to people like us, you know, who are like the wider part of the diaspora. And again, it's one of those things like it shouldn't be like that. But at the same time, it's nothing personal. I could see why, when it comes to making that concession and that change, they're going to first look to African citizens before they look to us. They do
But we
have that closer
but
connection and affinity.
we were
That's going
talking
to
about the
naturally
we
happen. And
but we're talking
that's what
about, of
happens
course,
with
of wait,
continents and
wait, Tim,
cultures.
of course people are going to align next to each other based on geography, because that's the base level where humans sort of interact. We identify
Mm.
first with our geography because we're told to, but humanitarianism, it should be the area or the realm of human life where all sorts of barriers between us disappear. If somebody were drowning in the water in front of you, Tim, I imagine that you're a good person and you would reach out your hand to help save them, whether they were white, black, Chinese, whatever. When it came to what is happening now in the Mediterranean, they are letting black bodies die, disregarding their own laws for no other reason than those people are a very distinct phenotypical other. And then you are saying that these
No,
people,
it's not. I don't think it's
okay,
as simple as
you,
that. It's not
no,
just
no, no,
because
wait,
they're
wait,
black.
all right, right.
Because black people are in Europe. Black people migrate to Europe all of the time.
But we're
Part of
not a
it,
controlling
like,
elite.
it is a part of it, but it's not just like, oh, we don't want these black people. It's just immigration is a complicated issue, and it's not all about race. You could speak to people within the USA, people here in different African countries, and over
Well,
there in Europe, of all
well,
colors and ethnicities, who will have different opinions on immigration. And many of them are not necessarily going to be like, oh, welcome everybody, you can come. We know that's not true.
of
So
course
it's
not.
not it's
Of course not.
not
People,
not
people.
not being for immigrants. It's not necessarily all about racism there.
Of course, as we've noticed, when it does happen, people are against race. People are against immigration to a country when the people that are coming are an extreme other. We saw this happen with Brexit. There was no talk about leaving the European Union until a bunch of Pakistanis showed up, until a bunch of Africans showed up, and other dark-skinned, melanated people who are clearly
That's not true.
phenotypically. Then why did Brexit happen then? Why did Brexit happen then? It was not because of the Islam of the rise of Muslims. Okay. Oh,
Oh,
oh, you
right.
dropped out.
You dropped
I know
out.
you have to
I
go
know you have
soon.
to
I
go
know you have
soon.
to go
I know you
soon,
have to
but
go soon. Okay. But Brexit, I guess, yeah, there's a long history behind that. But talk of leaving the European Union started almost as soon as we joined, and
it did
began
not
with
seriously happen
Margaret
until
Thatcher
immigration.
back in the 1980s, like the mid 80s. And then ever
Right.
since then, within the Conservative Party, you've had this growing wing of skeptics and Europhobes who want to leave the EU. This is something that they've been like slowly, kind of like carefully working towards for like over 20 years. But I do
Mm-hmm.
agree with you. They did like use the kind of fears, some of them racial, around immigration and um, you know, of different people to kind of fearmonger the locals and get them to vote for Brexit. But
Right.
Brexit in itself, it's yeah, Brexit and leaving the EU is
It was
it's
largely to do
it's
with
not just
immigration.
about race,
If,
because even
if,
like, just to quickly say, even before, yeah, that even now to some extent, yeah, in the UK, we get, until recently, we get a lot of immigration from, Spain, Portugal, Poland, Romania, and British people also talk rubbish about them. They're like, oh, all of these Poles, all of these migrants are coming, and guess
right.
what they did? Right. They voted for Brexit to stop those guys from coming, and now more people are actually coming from, Africa and different parts of Asia to actually help replace it. So it's a complicated story. It's got a bit of everything in it.
Right.
Right.
We can't
We can't
obfuscate the fact.
obfuscate the fact.
Obfuscate the fact though.
Obfuscate
I
the
can hear
fact, though. I
myself,
can
so
hear
that's hella
myself, so that's
annoying. So
hella
we're gonna
annoying.
cut
So
this
we're gonna
short.
cut this short.
But we got to do
But
this
we gotta
again,
do this
man. No
again,
hard
man. No
feelings,
hard
man. Right?
feelings, man. Right?
No, yeah, no, it was a good back and forth. I learned a lot from it, and yes, we will. You know, this is all good practice for the podcast.
Yeah, for the
For
For the
podcast,
some
podcast,
other,
for more
for
interesting
more
content,
interesting
for more
content, for
interesting
more interesting
discussions. I
discussions.
really enjoyed
I
this,
really
Tim,
enjoyed
man.
this,
High
Tim,
five,
man.
man.
High five,
yeah,
man.
likewise, yes, virtual high five. Yeah.
All right, man.
All right, man.
All right, have a good
All right, have
evening.
a good evening.
All right, you too. Good night. Have a
All
good
right,
night.
ciao.
All right,
See you later,
ciao.
guys.
All right.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for watching.